Psalm number 4. I claim my righteousness in the face of those who would deny me my right, who would disparage me and dismiss me, who refuse to see the goodness in my words and in my being. I turn to you, good God, you who plant the seeds of insight, who shape the heart for justice, who gift the vision of a renewed humanity and a redeemed earth. Be my strength, renew my courage, restore my dignity among the people, that they may listen and believe, that your purposes may be fulfilled. Keep a guard on my mouth. Let not my hurt and anger destroy the possibility of peace to come. Wrap me in a wise and thoughtful silence, that I may discern the right and the true. Illumine our shadows and make our lives and our life together radiant with your light. You are our joy, nothing compares, not the riches or the ages or the accolades of our neighbours. We rest in you, our trust secure, our peace assured. Amen.
It's fair to say that I've spent more nights losing sleep and more days thinking long and hard about today's, more of a reflection, than I have over any other sermon or reflection I've given whilst in Ponty. In preparation, I've read tough articles, listened to a wide range of friends, church members and neighbours, ordered books, and even indulged in a fascinating philosophical debate with a university lecturer about knowledge. Is it ever separate from the knower? Even after all this, I approach this subject with a great deal of hesitation. For I, a white, middle-class English man, am going to touch on the subject of race and racism, an area that we have certainly not ignored as a church in the past, but that is particularly charged with heightened passion today. Over the last couple of weeks, one cannot fail to have been appalled by the murder of George Floyd by the white policeman in Minnesota, or moved by the outpouring of anger and grief that have flowed from it. I say appalled and moved, but not shocked, because if I'm honest, I didn't find it shocking. My lifelong fascination with America, which for me encapsulates the best and worst of humanity, has meant I'm sadly very aware that George Floyd's murder was no isolated case. In March of this year, Breonna Taylor was killed by plainclothes police officers who entered her house as she slept. In February, Ahmaud Arbery was fatally shot by two white men whilst out jogging. In recent years, the names Paul Castaway, Michael Brown, Trayvon Martin, Tamir Rice, and so many more have been added to the tragically ever-increasing list of those from the Black, Indigenous, and people of colour community whose lives have been taken by systemic prejudice. And whilst much of the backdrop for such atrocities is unique to the US, such as the unaccountability of police unions and the insidious obsession with guns in the country, one cannot deny that their underlying cause is pervasive here too. If anything, Britain pioneered and exported racism across the globe, and our relationship is by no means in the past tense. The disproportionate use of stop and search powers, the increase in racist rhetoric used by many media commentators and significant government figures during the Brexit debate, the Windrush scandal, in the words of Dave, the British musician who gave a very powerful performance at the Brit Awards in February this year, they say you should be grateful we're the least racist. I say the least racist is still racist. So how do we, as almost exclusively white Christians living in South Wales, speak about the issue without inadvertently affronting someone or making a mistake? Well, my experience suggests to me that perhaps we can't. There are so many wildly diverse opinions on how to approach the issue, on whether I, as a white middle-class English man, should even speak about this at all, that in saying anything, it is possible that some offence will be caused. However, the thing that all commentators agree upon is that the worst thing one can do is to be silent on this. So what we'll be doing here is to try to be actively listening to often unheard voices and to offer our own thoughts with humility, an acknowledgement of speaking from a position of white privilege, and a hope that any errors made will be met with grace. It's also significant an issue, so significant an issue that we clearly can't address all of it in one 15-minute sermon, especially when I'm spending half of it on all these caveats. Rather, I'll be reflecting on different aspects of racism and prejudice in the remaining Sundays in June. And then in July, those who feel encouraged to explore the issue further will be given the opportunity to take part in a 28-day reading reflection, which might help us consider our inheritance, both positive and otherwise, regarding the issue. More details in next week's news sheet. So, are you sitting uncomfortably? Then I'll begin. We start with some words from the Epistle of James. You must understand this, my beloved. Let everyone be quick to listen, slow to speak. Listening is central to our faith. From the Shema to Jesus' parables, the work of the prophets to the teaching of the early church, our scriptures constantly and consistently remind us of the need to listen to God's voice in the groans of creation, the stillness of solitude, the words of neighbours. To listen is to love. And we are called once again to listen to the experiences, feelings, stories of those within our community who have suffered racist prejudice and discrimination. This week I have been saddened and angered by the stories I have heard. The mother who was encouraged to move on when looking for a baptism dress for her daughter in the Ponty Market. The support worker who gets abused whilst trying to care for others. The church members who have been called the N-word at school. As one woman from Chathlon put it, racism exists here in Wales, in Pontypridd. I've seen the Facebook posts, I've heard the stories, this is here. A woman there whose family has been the subject to racist abuse, acknowledging that racism is in our midst. Whilst much of the recent protesting in the UK has been righteous, passionate and prophetic, there has been some fair criticism of well-intentioned white folk who have taken the mic, led the charge and applauded themselves, whilst the overwhelming call from the black community is to listen and learn. One BIPOC friend explained to me that racism is like toothache. If you've never been subject to it, you don't know what it feels like. Don't know how painful it can be. We need to listen to even begin to understand. We need to learn about the everyday experiences of discrimination that our sisters and brothers face. We need to be followers of Jesus, the BIPOC man from Palestine who listened to often unheard voices, who asked searching questions, who encouraged challenging conversations. One consequence of such listening will be to learn much of the white privilege which is inherent in our social systems, institutions, even church. And I wonder if any of us tensed up when I spoke the phrase white privilege there. It's a term which garners a lot of emotion and misunderstanding, and I'm trying to educate myself more about it by reading up on it, including books such as Rennie Edo-Lodge's Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race, which has been highly recommended by many commentators recently. In fact, that book is number one in the paperback non-fiction chart at the moment. And it's the first time that a black British author has topped it, which is a fact, which speaks loudly in itself. For now, though, it might be helpful to acknowledge that white privilege isn't something to feel guilty about. It is no updated original sin that you get just from birth or reason to self-flagellate, which would of course make it about white people again. Rather, it is something to acknowledge, learn about and challenge. Let me give you just one stark example that I encountered this week. I was lucky enough to be brought up by two loving parents who assured me that I was loved for who I was, not what I did. Their mantra, if there was one, was just do your best. As a white male, that's all I had to do, and all would be well. This week, two BIPOC friends of mine who are staggeringly inspiring people said to me quite casually that they have told their daughters that the system works against them. That if they are competing with an equally qualified white person for a job, the white person will get it. That they will have to try twice as hard, work twice as hard, love twice as hard to succeed and make a difference. When I asked if they or their daughters were upset or angered by this injustice, they smiled and replied that that is just the way it is. There's the white privilege. The privilege of growing up within a society that will silently and constantly favour you simply because of your skin colour, and you get to be largely unaware of it. It's not so very different from the prejudiced temple system that Jesus railed against. A system that dictated how close to God you could get dependent upon your ethnicity and religion, your gender and sexuality, your tribe and physical ableness. A system that God turned upside down in an outrageous act of sacred solidarity by becoming one of us, by sanctifying all human flesh, by touching lepers, welcoming women, and telling stories about good Samaritans and privileged fools. Within the conversation that I've had this week, I've asked if there's more the church can do to challenge the injustice of systemic racism at this time. One answer I was given reiterated the call to listen, not just to the current experiences, hopes, fears and reflections of our BIPOC sisters and brothers, but to the history of colonialism. To listen to how the oppressed, the marginalised, the loser understands our shared history. To listen also to the stories we treasure in the Bible, which is, as Reverend Dr. Liz Theo Harris puts it, a book by, about and for poor and marginalised people. It not only says that God blesses and loves the poor, but also that the poor are God's agents and leaders in rejecting and dismantling kingdoms that are built upon oppression and inequality. In our scriptures then, we are invited to listen to God's voice in the stories of a people who well knew the pain of prejudice, the oppression of empires, the horror of legalized brutality. And so we listen to God's voice in the songs of slaves, the anger of exiles, the protests of the powerless. We listen to God's voice in the cry of a baby born in poverty, the shouts of a table turning radical, the desperate cries of an innocent man gasping for breath as state officials watch him die. We listen to God's voice in words of lament, fury, desperation, and ultimately of hope. For we hear of a coming kingdom where everyone is welcomed, valued, and loved. We hear of a God who demands that justice roll on like a river and righteousness a mighty stream. We hear of a promise that one day death will be no more. Mourning and crying and pain will be no more. For God will dwell amongst us and wipe away every tear from our eyes. God is still speaking in the ways and through the people that God always has done. The real question is, are we listening?